We're very, very privileged to have today 3 guests that have spared their time for one of our sessions as part of Graduate Advice Week, hosted by the Career Service here at the University of Glasgow. Can I ask our guests to introduce themselves, what their roles are, and the companies that they work for? See myself on the screen. Andy is to my left. So can I ask Andy, then Hannah, then Jack to introduce themselves?
Yeah, hi guys. My name's Andy Stoddart. I currently work in the Cabinet Office and I'm head of recruitment and onboarding for a thing called the Government Consultancy Hub. I've got 22 years experience in the civil service and 5 different departments. So I know the recruitment process off by heart. So I'll try and give you some top tips and introduce you to the way our recruitment system works. I've also had sort of 3 experiences of being in the private sector as well. For a couple of tax roles, and I ran my own business for 8 years. So we get quite a varied CV. But I'll try and talk you through the civil service process when we get to that.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Harrison. I'm the Business Director of GTR Recruiting Solutions, which is part of Target Jobs, which is a graduate careers website. I work for the Recruiting Solutions division, which works with lots of different graduate recruiters on delivering their recruitment processes. So we work with about 40 clients, delivering about 2,000 graduate hires every year. So lots of different experience across different sectors. And I've been a recruiter for about 20 years as well. So well seasoned in the early career space.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Jack. I work for FDM Group, who, if you've not heard of us, we recruit recent graduates to be IC and business consultants, doing lots of different kinds of things. And I oversee lots of different parts of the recruitment process. Well, all parts of it actually. So telephone interviews, video interviews, in-person interviews, online tests, all that stuff. So hopefully I can speak a bit about that, let you know what to expect. And I don't know if there's time for questions or anything at the end, but I'm certainly happy to sort of share my email and you know, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well if there's any questions we won't have time for.
Thank you for the introductions. Can I also ask either one of you to tell me if my sound goes off, because I've got, in technology terms, a dodgy headphone. Can I also say to our audience, if you would like to ask questions, can you put them into the Q&A menu, which you'll see at the, if it's how you see it, the Q&A part, not the chat part. I do know that some links will be put to the chat bit, but if you can ask your questions and we can address them towards the end of the session. Right, so I think we've got an amazing panel today. I think they can answer or any of our questions on recruitment. But can I start again with Andy and ask you, how do you think, I mean, recruitment has changed enormously in a way that we would never have imagined in the last 2 years. How do you think recruitment practices have changed in the place that you've worked, and just from your research and awareness over the last 2 years, awareness generally? So how do you think recruitment practices have changed?
I think in the civil service, because we're doing, you know, all interviews virtual, you know, through like Google Meets or Microsoft Teams, you know, I think it's been easier for the candidates. A civil service interview is typical, you know, a panel of 3 will interview you, and they'll ask you sort of 4 sort of behaviour or competency-based questions. And it can be quite daunting if you get into a face-to-face room. You know, you suddenly get 3 strange people in front of you and they're all sort of firing questions. So I've felt whenever I've sort of done the interview process and, you know, the feedback I've got from candidates, doing it sort of virtually and online, you know, and that probably, as everybody's aware, online, you can have various prompts or notes, you know, that, you know, you can see, you know, when you're on the screen that helps you, whereas you can't with that face-to-face. So I think the whole process has been easier, you know, for candidates, you know, as a process, and made them feel more, you know, more at ease. So I think we've had a sort of better performance from candidates in interviews than we would get face-to-face normally.
Thanks, Andy. Hannah, so how do you think, in terms of GTI, that you've noticed that recruitment practices have changed?
I mean, I think we've obviously seen a massive move to online, as everyone has. I think, would agree with Andy that actually that's been quite beneficial to candidates in terms of helping them prepare, and also not having to travel all over the country if they're kind of got various interviews. I think probably the biggest challenge from a recruiter perspective in the sort of a year or so ago was that we just had huge volumes of applications. We suddenly had this sort of almost like panic as everyone just applied to everything. So there was, quite a challenge from a recruiter perspective to find the really good candidates amongst, often double or triple the volumes, which was really challenging, and obviously just slowed everything down in order to kind of get back to candidates. I think this last, we're kind of coming to the end of the graduate season now. It's definitely returned a bit more to normal in terms of volumes. Most people that we work with have stuck with virtual, albeit we've had a few kind of employers going back to face-to-face. And I think what we're seeing now is probably a bit more of a hybrid model where the majority of the process will go virtual, but then try and organise sort of something face-to-face, either post-offer or at the very end of the process, which I think is quite nice, because it means at that point you're kind of meeting people when, you've got the job or you're kind of very close to getting the job. And I think that's working really well. I think the other kind of observation that we've seen this year is we have seen quite a lot of people dropping out or just not turning up to assessment centres. I don't know whether that kind of virtual space makes people feel more comfortable just to kind of not turn up in a way that they might not if they were having to get on a train somewhere. But certainly, for us, my plea, I guess, to everyone would be if you changed your mind or you kind of don't want to go forward, just let the recruiters know, because quite often we've got candidates on reserve waiting that would like the opportunity. But those are probably the two biggest things. I think probably the only other thing I would add is that in terms of kind of recruitment practices, we have seen a reduction in the use of the group exercise across clients. So often that was quite a big kind of staple part of a recruitment process. I think some employers just felt that was a bit difficult to deliver or manage in a virtual setting. So they've kind of just moved away from that and stuck more to kind of presentations or individual case studies. But those are probably the biggest things that I've seen across the kind of clients that we work with.
No, thank you. A very newsy answer, Hannah, and this stimulated quite a lot of questions in my head. Jack, the same question to you. How do you think recruitment practices have changed from what you can see in the last 2 years?
Definitely echoing what's been said already about flexibility. We interview usually between 60 and 70 people each week in our sort of busier season. So, instead of having all these people have to pay for travel, sometimes having to, stay somewhere for the night, we don't have to come to our office to be interviewed anymore. We do completely virtually. And I think that's going to be there to stay, because it allows us to offer more accessibility adjustments if that's necessary, a lot easier than when we were in person on the 6th floor of a building in the city centre of Glasgow. I think it's also nice as well because it's less intimidating. Any student right now will know what it's like being in a Zoom room as part of their classes or whatever we've been doing. And we do our assessments on Zoom. So it's a familiar environment. And there's an opportunity to have a kind of informal chat in the main room on our final stage interview days, instead of having sort of network in person. I guess some people preferred that, but I think it is a bit easier just having it all virtual.
From my perspective, another question is that you said recruiters like it because there's so many benefits in terms of costing, and they can probably spread the net wider. I said it's sort of cheaper. Do you see you've heard a recruiter mention?
Hannah, your sound a little bit at the end there, Fiona. What was the question?
I was just saying that you mentioned, Hannah, the disadvantage in terms of there's probably multiple volumes, increased volumes of applications. Are there any other disadvantages that you think that comes with a move to virtual recruitment?
I think, when you're dealing with early careers, there's always high volumes of candidates. That's just the nature of the industry we work in. And I think, as recruiters, what we talk a lot about is candidate experience and candidate engagement. And it's always harder to engage in a virtual setting than you would face to face. And I think it makes it more difficult, I think, sometimes for candidates to decide whether it's the right employer. It's a big decision to know that this is somewhere I want to start my career. And yes, whilst you don't have to travel to an assessment centre, actually part of that experience is walking through the door and seeing the office and all of those things that we kind of take for granted when we work, in the world. And I think, particularly last year, a lot of students had to start their jobs virtually, from their bedrooms. And I think that's extremely challenging. And I think it's extremely challenging, as an employer of kind of graduates myself, to be able to build that culture and build that kind of engagement. So I think we've had to work a lot harder as employers to really build that candidate experience and that candidate engagement and that kind of onboarding and settling in period for candidates coming in and making them feel kind of safe. I think, we will probably see a bigger bounce rate of graduates, as in they come for a year or two and then go on somewhere else, potentially as a risk, because they don't have that same haven't had that same kind of engagement and trust built up that you would normally have got during a kind of more typical process. Or, for, I guess, the flip of all the advantages of kind of that kind of easier process to deliver. I think that is a challenge, and that will continue to be a challenge for us over the next few years.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult. I worked in test and trace for 9 months, at the start of the pandemic. I was a sort of senior advisor to sort of Matt Hancock at the time, and then got involved in sending out lateral flow tests, throughout England. And the whole of these 9 months, I never met my team, apart from virtual or online. So it was a whole different challenge, and something you had to really think about and sort of live with. But it was funny. It's the only job I've ever been, at quite a high level for 9 months that I never actually met anybody face to face. So it was quite difficult. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think the other thing is, when you bring a fresh graduate into your business, a lot of the way that they learn is just by, you sort of go, well, sit with that person, then sit with that person. They get a lot from just being in that environment and just sitting with people and hearing conversations. And I think you're much more conscious now of checking in with people and kind of making sure they're okay. And, so much of the world of work is self-guided, and if you've come from a very structured university degree environment where you've got a timetable, then suddenly giving someone, here's the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, or here is, this is what you need to do. I think it's quite hard to embed that shift quickly when they're not just sat in an office, and you can kind of keep an eye on people and make sure they're okay. So I think that kind of pastoral care piece is much more challenging in those kind of that first year kind of coming in. And I think
it's one thing in my role, in onboarding everybody we take into, the consultancy hub. It's been difficult for them. They're all new to the civil service, and they're coming into a new process and a new way of working, and they're coming in virtual. A lot of them have found it, very difficult, as you say. And you've got to try and, go that extra space to make them feel at ease and, help them settle in.
Jack, do you have any comments with regards to the difficulties that recruiters have found, in addition to what Hannah and Andy have said?
Yeah, I think just around expectations that managers would have about any kind of new starts. It can sometimes be, I think, a bit of a difficult transition for some people, because I don't think it's necessarily a level playing field in terms of the background that people come from. So some people, it's really natural. They can get on in that virtual world. They've already just kind of got the knack down for that. But for others, it is more challenging. It is more about adapting and figuring out how to adapt for whatever that means for the specific role, because it can be quite different even within our graduate roles. I mean, some are hybrid, but some projects that our graduates are working on are fully remote. Lots of people, I know I was like this, sort of doing lectures from my bed, probably not the best habit. Don't follow my example, but I definitely don't recommend trying to do your graduate job from bed. I think it's really important to have things like as best of a sort of work environment at home, as possible, trying to carve out a little space where you can, so that you're not, just sort of sitting in bed or sitting on the sofa doing works. I think it's really important, and a lot of people maybe take for granted that you just have to log in, you get a computer, you log in, do your work, but actually having adapting your space at home can be quite challenging for people.
Thank you for that. Now, it is from a recruitment perspective, looking at our students, I mean, everything's moved on virtual, and I think picking up on a point that you made, Hannah, about there's multiple applications, and we've heard anecdotally from students that there's a great emphasis at the front end of the recruitment process on online testing, psychometric testing, to use as a general term. And these, I mean, we've got a tool in the university to help students practice on them, but it does cause immense amount of anxiety with students, and which is understandable. Have you got any comments on psychometric testing or top tips on that? And then maybe we can look further about top tips in general, but looking at the online testing specifically.
I think that there has been a kind of increase in the different types of tests now, which is good. I think test providers are really conscious of making them as quick and easy and kind of accurate as possible. I think that there has to be, it's always challenging building that trust in the process for students, because they're kind of like, how is this how is this test relevant to what I'm doing? I think tests used well are really a really effective tool in kind of identifying candidates with the right skills. I think unfortunately there are a lot of employers that still don't use them in the right way, so they just use them as a kind of sifting tool, and they're not really sure why they're using them. And my challenge always to an employer when they're kind of looking at testing is, well, tell me what you're trying to test, and let's make sure it's the right test. I do think kind of practicing is really important, not necessarily because it will change the outcome of the test result, because these tests are designed to they're testing kind of core cognitive capability or kind of emotional intelligence, or all of the things, the kind of strengths or personality elements that are there. You are that person, your capability is a certain way, and those tests are designed to make sure that you're the right fit for the role, and therefore they're good in that sense. But I do think what can put students off and mean they don't perform as well as they could is if they're sort of almost like floored by the process of doing it and they panic. So I do think as much practice as they can get into kind of just familiarise themselves with how the questions might be, or what it looks like and feels like. I think that does definitely help. But there is a lot of science that sits behind online tests in terms of making sure that they are predictive of performance. And we do a lot of work as recruiters to make sure those tests and those norm groups that we use are robust. But I do think there is just that familiarity with doing them that would help a student in terms of preparing.
Can I just follow up on that, Hannah? Thank you for that. I've just put in the chat a link to a tool that we've purchased from the Careers Service, which has got numerous different psychometric tests, whether it's numeracy, literacy, critical thinking. There's some gamification tests. So we've invested in this tool, so it's free for students in all years, in all subjects. So you can see it there on the link. It's also on our Careers Service website under interviews. So please use it.
Can I just pick up, there's a question that's come into the Q&A about disability, Fiona, if you don't mind if I just pick that up quickly, just from a recruitment perspective. All tests that I'm familiar with have adjustments that can be taken into account for disabled students. So I think the most critical thing is, if you do have a disability that might impact your ability to do a test, it's really important that you flag it to the employer that you're applying to. Some adjustments will be additional time, so particularly for things like dyslexia or dyspraxia, they can be kind of adjusted to enable kind of additional time. Or in some cases, if someone's got a disability that might impact them, we would just skip the testing stage. So I think the most important thing is disclosure. Don't just have a go and hope it's going to be okay. Absolutely, if you've got a disability, we would have a conversation and just kind of talk through that and work out the best adjustment. So it's just about, confidence to kind of say, I need some help here.
Again, in the civil service, it's the same, Hannah. I'll always ask you the question, when you're completing, the application form. So, the more honest you are, the more we can help you, so that, you'll get the best out of it.
Yeah, there's some really good adjustments now that can be done, particularly, with kind of visual impairments, or just, even just changing the kind of colours on the screen to make them kind of more accessible. There's a huge range of stuff that can be done. So it's just about kind of saying what you need.
Yeah, so same with FDM as well. All of those adjustments that have been mentioned, but whatever it is that you require, we'll make sure that you've got that. And as well, I just want to bring up, asking questions. If you are applying to a graduate program, it's likely that there's a person or a team who will be assigned, to work on those applications. So don't be afraid of asking questions to fully understand what the tests are, because there's lots of, psychometric testing is, I suppose that is a specific term, but if you've not done a psychometric test, you probably don't know really what to expect. So definitely ask questions, understand fully what it is. And, there's tons and tons of practice tests on the internet. Definitely make use of the ones that the Career Service have provided as well. That's always a great idea, great place to start. And just Google search whatever kind of test it is. There'll be plenty of resources for you to practice with.
And I think I'd just say they're not there to catch you out. They're there just to assess a level of confidence and skill. So I think have comfort in that feeling. It's not there to trip you up. There is often a question from international students or students where English is not their first language, and they have concerns over some of the tests where it's testing their language. Does anyone have any comments on that?
In many cases, you can choose which language you take the test in. So I think it's always worth asking that question, because obviously, as an employer, you want to make sure you're creating a level playing field and not putting unnecessary barriers in. So I think it's always worth asking that. And again, the kind of what they're testing is not that the majority of tests are not designed to test your English language capability. They're trying to test your kind of capability. Obviously, in some cases, it may be wanting to make sure that someone can operate in the English language because that's a requirement of the job. But I think always ask the question and see whether there are any kind of adaptations to those tests that can be offered.
Thank you for that. So moving on from the psychometric testing element of the recruitment practice, have you got any top tips to enable students to show their best self off? Now, I know I can almost hear your brains going, where do I start? Where do I begin? If you want, I'll happily group them. Yes. Can I just throw it out there? As a recruiters yourself, what makes the difference to a student that you will recruit and one that you put in the maybe no pile?
On the civil service, has got a very good process, and it's pretty standardised across every department. So if you logged on a thing called Civil Service Jobs, that will show you every job on the civil service. All the big departments like MRC, DWP, the Cabinet Office to the wee ones, and you'll find that every sort of civil service job has got the same process. So once you do one application or you do one interview, the process will follow the same way through. So basically, most civil service jobs will ask you for 4 behaviours or competencies. I put a link in the chat to what's called success profiles. So that shows you the behaviours that a job can ask for. So typically in the civil service, it will be like delivering at pace, managing a quality service. So basically, the top tip I would give is to use what we call a STAR example. So it would ask you to give an example of, say, delivering at pace. So if you related that to a student experience, it could be that, most students obviously get assignments or projects to get in. Typically, when I was at college, I left it to probably near the end to do it. So suddenly, you've got 2 weeks to put an assignment in or something. So it would be, to describe how you've done that. And you use the STAR technique, which is situation, which that would, just tell the sort of background to it. The T would be the task that you're asked to do. The A is the action that you took, to get it, done in the 2 weeks, and the R would be the result. So if you structure your competency like that, and it will always be in 250 words that we ask for in the civil service. So the more you practice getting the most into your 250 words, and then if you apply for one job and you get sort of feedback, then you can structure your competencies towards that. So it's all about, experience in the civil service of how you structure your examples, how people think about them. If you think you've wrote a good competency, but maybe in one job you don't get a good score, don't worry, because it can be, individual. But what we tend to find is, students are quite good examples that, they might not think it at the time, but most students, when they've done a 4-year course, have went through quite a lot of examples of things if they stop to take the time to sort of think about it. So it would just be getting, a good example or a story for the 4 competencies that are asked for, and then just sort of telling your story in 250 words. Or if you get to the interview, telling your story, from start to finish in a sort of common sense and logical manner. And that's where you would, score sort of high marks in the civil service sort of interview and test.
Thank you, Andy. I'm hoping you can still hear me. I've just put into the chat a link to the STAR technique, the infamous, famous, ever helpful technique. So please check that out. Hannah, have you got any?
Yeah, I think, probably maybe one of the biggest frustrations when we're kind of looking at applications or interviewing is if it doesn't look like the candidate's done any research on the company. So it doesn't feel like they have understood what they're applying for or what the company does, or even kind of what's going on currently in the market that might impact that company. And I know that's really difficult if you're making lots of job applications to kind of take the time to do that research. But that is one of the number one reasons why candidates get rejected at that very first stage, is because they're just not articulating anything unique to that company. So it looks as though they may as well have just pasted any, if I can take the name of the company out and put another name for company in, and it still makes sense. It's not specific enough to that employer. So I think that is a really big reason why we reject a lot of candidates at that first stage. And indeed at interview, we get feedback from employers at interview going, they just didn't know what this job was. They've got all this way, they've got all the way through this process, and then they just couldn't really talk about what was going on in the company. I think the other thing I would say is obviously there are application deadlines, but I would definitely not recommend leaving it to the last minute, because I think particularly where there are very popular roles for an organisation, often we'll start the assessment centres for those early, even before the deadline has passed. So those jobs could have gone by the time, if you leave it to the last minute, those really kind of attractive roles may well have gone and been filled. But I suppose that said, if you do miss the boat, don't panic, because there's often lots of jobs. I think one of the biggest changes I've seen in the last 2 years is that the timings of recruitment have gone completely out the window. So it used to be, if you hadn't got your applications in by October, you completely missed the boat. Like that was it, we were done. And I've been putting graduate jobs live now for roles starting in September. So there is always kind of stuff to look out for in terms of kind of other roles, and also direct entry roles as well. As often kind of if you miss the kind of graduate scheme but you're interested in a company, do kind of have a look at their website, because there may be some entry level roles for graduates to kind of get into as well. I think don't panic if you're sitting here now and you're about to graduate and you still haven't landed yourself a job. I guarantee there's still lots of stuff. We're all still really busy in my team doing recruitment. There's still lots of stuff live. And I think finally, sorry, I know I've talked a lot, but I think my final thing would be to say, do get feedback. I think if you get to an assessment centre and you're not successful, really do take the opportunity to ask for feedback. Most recruiters will be really happy to give it if you've reached that stage in the process, and it's super helpful, and we really want you to be successful kind of in the next job. So get the feedback if you can.
Few great points there. First one is the scattergun approach. Yes, that doesn't work, as in you you copy and paste. I think for anyone that looks at applications can spot it within a second.
Yes.
So spend some time. It doesn't have to be a lot, by looking at their social media, looking on their website beyond the homepage, looking at annual reports, CSR reports, environmental sustainability reports. Show interest. Why are you applying for a job if you don't know what it is and where it is? I can't see the point. I think can you hear me okay?
Can hear you now. Missed what you said.
I can't remember what else you said, Anna. You said loads of good things
I said
feedback. I
yeah.
always find a tricky one, because not everybody gets feedback.
Right.
Sometimes
but you can ask.
Be quite bland. You can ask. I think it's worth asking, absolutely. But my advice, and I'd like a few nods or shakes, is don't put so much emphasis on it. It could be helpful, it could be annoying, but don't spend ages and ages and ages thinking about it. I'm just speaking from my own personal experiences as well.
Yeah, the quality, honestly, look, from my, we try really hard to give candidates really useful feedback. So, but yes, but it's worth an ask, I think, to kind of understand, in case you kind of don't make the same mistake twice.
Cool. Jack, have you got any pointers on top tips?
Yeah, definitely. I think by far the most important thing is to be able to speak about how you done something, not just what it was. So definitely, Andy mentioned the STAR method, and that's a good structure to take if you're ever unsure. That's something that a lot of people like. Maybe you're talking about a time when you'd received a grade that you weren't happy with, and you're talking about overcoming that setback and the fact that you've done better next time around. But don't just say what the situation was. It's always much more believable, much more authentic to hear someone talk about the individual steps, how you done it. Did you get more organized? How did you become more organized? Did you buy a diary finally? Did you start using your Outlook calendar? Did you take on feedback? Whatever it was, as much detail as you can give the interviewer, it just really helps you come across far, far better, more confidently. And it's easy. The good news is it's very easy to prepare for that, because all you have to do is look at your CV and really reflect on what you've been up to in the past. Even just having a degree, you've got enough to talk about. And it's just about how you articulate it. And you can do that really well and really effectively by talking about individual scenarios and how you achieved whatever that was, or how you solved that problem.
Thank you, Jack. I think your points have been great. Thank you for that. I mean, there's a mention of the STAR framework to frame your answers, and they're often to what are called competency or skills or experience type questions. I mean, has anybody got any comments on the strengths approach to interviewing, and how what that is, and how students might prepare, if at all, for it?
I think on the strengths questions you get asked on the civil service, it's really just be honest and say what comes into your mind in the first instance. Don't sort of panic about it or don't stress about it. Most strength-based interviews are what the person's gut reaction is, and 90% of the time, they get it right. If they just say what they feel, that first sort of question. So don't overthink it would be my sort of top tip.
Yeah, I mean, strengths-based recruitment it's similar rooted to competency-based, and that is asking you to talk about experience. What it's really tried to pull out is, where do you get your energy from? What excites you? Because ultimately it's about, are you going to enjoy this job? And I think it's kind of it's almost the same point we were making about online tests, is that these processes are designed to really match the right people to the job. We don't design them to trick people. We don't design them to kind of make people feel bad. We really just want people to be their best and be the right fit for the organisation that they're applying to. So just being yourself, being authentic is the best possible thing you can do in these situations.
Yeah, with my experience with marking strength-based questions throughout our process, I think people sometimes struggle with how open-ended they can be, but they can be deliberately open-ended because they're open to interpretation. There's not, almost think of it like there's no way to score 100%. It's not possible. There's not a perfect answer that exists. It's more down to you. They're designed to find out more about you, for you to bring your personality across. And as Hannah said, talk about things that, are going to bring your personality out. And if you can talk about your hobbies or things that you're involved with, maybe it's extracurriculars, maybe you were in a GUSA sports team, or, whatever you might be involved with outside of class. Talk about these things, because these are the things that help you stand out. And it's always it's always really obvious when someone is passionate about something. And if you can bring in examples about something that you've enjoyed doing, something that you think that you're good at, that will help you come across way better than trying to talk about things that you perhaps didn't enjoy or found really tough.
Thank you. Yeah, some great answers there. I think that will be supportive in any strengths questions. I've just got one more question for the time being, and then I think we've had some really great questions on the Q&A. So my question is about references. So students often find it difficult to find a reference, an academic reference. Many reasons. They're often in very large classes and the academic doesn't know them so well. Particularly this has come up during the last 2 years when some of the academics and students have never even met each other. What's your thoughts on how they can approach this referencing difficulty, and do you ask for references in your recruitment process?
The civil service process wouldn't. All I would do would go, background checks into yourself from a security point of view. So I would check, your work history, or have you been at uni, or I would do a criminal check to, check that, you don't have a criminal record of that. But that's all the civil service will do. It won't do a personal reference or take any stock from references like that.
Yeah, the same across, clients I work with. Generally, we don't ask for anything like a detailed reference. It's more just to confirm dates. So just dates that you were at university, or if you've had any employment, the dates that you were there, rather than anyone needing to know you personally. To be honest, I think our recruiters would trust their judgment on whether you're the right fit for the role rather than someone else's.
Yeah, if you've been involved with any sort of extracurriculars like sports teams or societies, you can always ask someone who knows you perhaps on the committee. I've done that in the past, and that's worked when I've been in a bit of a bind, because I worked for Topshop when I first graduated, and obviously Topshop doesn't exist anymore, so I can get a reference. So yeah, that's always an option.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm just going to go to the Q&A, and Laura here.
The only other top tip I would give Fiona, just from a personal point of view, is basically never give up, and don't take any sort of feedback, or if you don't get the job personally, that's sometimes the worst thing you can do. So just keep trying and have faith in your own ability would be one of my top tips.
Yeah, if at first you don't succeed, etc., etc.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. So going to the Q&A, I'm just looking at Laura's question here, and she asks, what challenges will there be as an international student applying for jobs in the UK?
I think it's definitely more difficult. I think that, I think it would be unfair not to say it isn't difficult at the moment. I think my advice would be to ask the question up front of the recruiter if they do sponsor international students. Most recruiters would give you an honest answer to that, and it's much better than to waste your time kind of filling in an application if they're really just not. A lot of organisations just don't have the ability to sponsor students, and it's a yes/no answer. If they do have that opportunity, they will normally put you through the process and then see how they go in terms of getting people through. But I think you just need to kind of ask them whether they have the ability to sponsor international students. There are lots of companies that do, but I think you just need to know kind of upfront.
Yeah, from a civil service point of view, it might be harder going through security checks. Would be that, you know, my take when you go through this sort of onboarding process and security checks, it might take longer, and you know there might be more checks, and potentially, you know, it could be more difficult for an international student.
Yeah, definitely ask those questions at the start, because unfortunately, I think not all employers will be 100% upfront about that. And you know, you don't want to be in a situation where you've been working for a couple of years on a program or for a company to then find out that you can't be sponsored after that. So yeah, definitely ask those questions.
Thank you. I'll just go further on and then maybe come to the more specific question at the beginning. You did mention, Hannah, that you've noticed a tendency for there to be less group interviews, or but with that question in mind anyway, can anyone think how they might stand out in a group interview, I'm presuming in a successful way?
Yeah, I think, you know, having watched hundreds of students go through them, I think there's probably a few things that are kind of important to say. I think the first thing is you've got to give the assessors enough information to make a decision on. So if you don't say anything, you're absolutely not going to get through. So it's really important to contribute. I think on the flip side of that, there's nothing worse than seeing a group exercise where one person just talks the whole time and doesn't let anyone else in. And I think that's why we've, you know, for whatever reason, a virtual setting seems to have exacerbated that problem, which is why I think some employers are moving away from it. It's harder, I think, in a virtual setting to sort of get into the conversation. I think particularly when sometimes you've got delays on sound and stuff. So I think that's why, you know, it's been a bit more challenging, but it's absolutely critical that you say something. It doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not always the most talkative person in the room that gets hired. It's often the person that sits back and reflects and then says something absolutely like dynamite midway through that gets the job, and everyone's like, gosh, that was really insightful. That was just, you know, they absolutely nailed that answer. So I actually had a situation with a client the other day where they had a candidate that just literally just took over the whole group. No one else got a word in edgeways. They actually decided not to look at the group as in their decision making because they felt it was so damaging to the other candidates. So, you know, we do take these kind of things into account when we're making decisions. But yeah, say less, but say really good stuff, I would say, is my advice for groups.
Any other advice? Less is more is always is my rule generally in life, I think.
So it's just that you'll never get asked that in the civil service. So apply for the civil service as much as you like. You'll never get a group interview.
Yeah,
personally, I've had a couple in the private sector, and I would echo what Hannah was saying. I found them quite difficult. You know, there's not a right or a wrong approach, and it depends the characters you're in the room with. You know, sometimes you'll get somebody like Hannah's saying, and you're like, how do I cope with this person? What they, you know, they think they're brilliant. They don't give anybody a chance to say anything. But you know, personally, I always sort of listened and then tried to say something, and you know, thought that they were making a fool of themselves. But you know, it is I found it quite a difficult process when I've done it in the private sector.
Jack,
we don't have group exercises as part of the process anymore with FDM, but we do have everybody grouped together in a main room as part of the final stage interviews. Then the interviews take place in separate breakout rooms. So I would say if you do find yourself in one of these sort of communal rooms, even if it's virtual, you never know who might hear what you're saying. So just be professional. Remember kind of where you are. You don't know who's listening.
I would just to add a cautionary tale on that. I was once involved running group exercises, and there was a candidate that came in, and they were actually pretty decent at the assessment centre, but they were so horribly rude to the person on the reception when they arrived that we didn't offer them the job.
I mean, that is a serious school error, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you go into the interview and be nice to everybody, charming, big smiles, you know, jazz hands, the whole lot, obviously tempered to the right level. Anywho, I'm just going on to another question from Laura. It's more specifically aimed at you, Andy. Can international students work in the civil service?
They can, but it depends obviously what country they're from and how long they've been in the UK. But there isn't a barrier to say that they can't. As I say, it can be more difficult to do security checks if that's required for the role, depending on what's required. But civil service has got sort of 4 security roles. You've got standard checks, which are generally just standard criminal checks. Mm-hmm. You've got a counter-terrorist check, you've got a security check, and you've got a developed vetting check. So I would say for the last 2, it might be difficult for an international student to do that. But just for basic criminal checks and things like that, if they stayed in the UK, to do their course for 3 or 4 years, then no, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, thank you. Then again, Laura, thank you for your contributions. I think it's a question about having past experience that is then unrelated to their future aspiration in terms of jobs, and how might they position that?
I think all experience is good experience, and often, what we'd be looking for in an interview is just what's the narrative. So why did you do ABC and then go on to D? And I think as long as you've got a kind of really interesting story as to why, I did this and actually I didn't like it for these reasons, and therefore I decided I wanted to change career, and so went and studied that. I mean, I think that shows great flexibility, and adaptability as a student anyway, to be able to kind of realize and shift and do something different. But I think, anything you can talk about in terms of past skills, doesn't matter which sector you got them in. I think everything's relevant. So I absolutely wouldn't worry about that at all.
Yeah, some of the best competencies I've ever read have came from, unlikely scenarios that you maybe wouldn't think of, but people have structured their 250 words or, told their story in a way that they came across really, really well. And it's about how you structure and how you tell it, sometimes rather than the content.
I think, Fiona, just linked to that, there's another question about kind of from an international student about work experience gained in their home country. I think that's brilliant, because I think actually what you're often looking for when you're interviewing is people that are bringing diversity of thought, diversity of experience to companies, and actually work experience gained in another country is hugely valuable and hugely interesting, and actually will probably make you stand out in an interview process.
No, I would agree. I would agree without doubt. Any other comments on that question?
Well, I've got a master's that is absolutely unrelated to what I do, but I use it, the things that I learned as part of that so much, especially the kind of research skills that I got from that when I'm trying to figure out ways to analyze data. I might be looking at a particular problem, and going back to talking about how you articulate your experiences and talk about how you achieved something. Think about that process of achieving whatever that was as objectively as you can, and I can guarantee you'll then sort of see the links to the job description that you're applying for. So study that and understand the job description as much as you can, because you will have plenty to offer. It's just about making those connections yourself.
And I would back up everything. I mean, it comes down to the classic transferability of skills. You've learned something, developed something in one area, and how you use that experience and skills in another area. And I think for some students from other parts of the world, that transferability of skills is still not as developed as maybe it is in the UK. We love skills wherever, backing up what you've said, wherever you've gained it. If you can bring it and use it within a different context. We have got my favorite question is about LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, but one anonymous questioner has said, do recruiters go through, assess your LinkedIn profile? How do they use it?
I've been recruiting for 20 years. For many clients, I've never looked at a LinkedIn profile of a candidate.
No, you wouldn't do it in the civil service either.
FDM is probably a little bit different from most graduate employers, just with the sort of amount of people we take on. So we hire, I think last year it was 1,036 graduates, and that was just in the UK. So we're always looking for people, and I usually connect with around 20 people a day on LinkedIn. sort of making them aware of job opportunities that we've got. A couple of things I would really recommend to help you stand out. And this is coming from the training that LinkedIn gives to employers as their customers about how to find graduates. So this isn't just coming from FDM, but put in your tagline that you have, definitely put in whatever you want, but try to include the word graduate, because we can search for keywords, and it makes, that makes you a lot more visible. Definitely put on that you're open to work if you are looking for roles, because that makes you more likely to come up in a search. And just try and make sure your profile is as complete as possible, with any location preferences, with the sorts of industries that you're interested in. I definitely recommend having your degree grade on there, and whether or not your bachelor's degree was with honours or not, because there's sometimes a little bit of confusion with, just from FDM, for example, we work as one UK-wide recruitment team, and in Scotland, of course, we've got a 4-year bachelor's degree, but in England, that's typically a 3 years bachelor's degree, and to complicate that even more, if you do that at Glasgow, it's likely you'll have an MSc or an MA from that 4-year period. So just be clear if it's, MA ons, BSc ons, whatever it might be, and then your grade. But just as much information as you can get on there, the more information that's on there, the more likely it is to come up in someone's search.
Yeah, I should probably caveat what I said in that we absolutely use LinkedIn to attract candidates through. So we would kind of push out through LinkedIn, but we wouldn't ever use it as a part of the recruitment process. We wouldn't ever look at a LinkedIn profile to make a decision about a candidate. It would all be based on kind of what goes through that process.
Yeah, the same. The civil service will advertise, jobs on LinkedIn and advertise their recruitment campaigns, but they wouldn't look at somebody's profile and say.
So it's a mixed bag there. That's good. Saves me going on about how amazing LinkedIn is. Right. Last question. Still hearing me?
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was asked at the beginning and now at the end. From Hubia, I hope I'm said that correctly. Could you offer any advice on seeking recruiters from creative industries or humanities backgrounds, publishing, media, video, game, film, as an international student? That's quite specific. Does anyone have you got any links to any students that are wanting that, or recruitment services for PhD?
I think so. From a PhD perspective, we do a bit of PhD. We have a few kind of clients that recruit PhD. Generally, the way we would find candidates, that would be to go and contact relevant tutors or kind of supervisors of PhD programs, because obviously often the roles that we're looking for a PhD requires a very specific thing that they've done. We've got one role we're working on at the moment for a kind of a bank that needs very specific PhD and a specific thing. So we're kind of looking at kind of tutors for that. So that would be our general route, or via career services. So career services are often the route to everyone that we're looking for. So that's where we'll go first, rather than sort of specific kind of attraction channels, I suppose, for PhDs. I think from the creative or humanities, I think humanities, loads of recruiters looking for candidates with humanities backgrounds. I think that's a lot of employers don't specify particular degree backgrounds anyway. I think I can't say specifically for international students, but I think creative industries, I think trying to get into kind of big companies that do creative type work, like Sky, for example, has loads of kind of tech-based roles, but it gets you into the right industry, for example. Not as easy to find the roles. Often it's kind of getting some work experience and kind of getting your foot in the door, and those kind of, I suppose, the kind of media and publishing side can be a bit trickier, but those roles, the roles are out there. Generally, career services are always the way forward.
Thanks, Hannah. Any other points on that?
Yeah, just in the civil service, yeah, there's a lot of more specialised roles than people think. Like, you know, if you had a PhD in, you know, some sort of health background, you know, the new UK Health Security Agency has got lots of specialised jobs for people with sort of specialised PhDs and things like that that people could keep their eye on. And, you know, for international students, you know, the Foreign Office is always looking for, you know, clients to sort of work abroad. So, you know, if they had a role in your home country, you know, that might be an interesting sort of thing you could combine, you know, sort of policy or humanity with, you know, a role in your own country.
Good point, Andy. Anything else from you, Jack? Or has that been covered?
Yeah, so Hannah mentioned Sky. We've got quite a lot of our consultants in Scotland working on projects with Sky and doing all sorts of various things and lots of creative things there. So they do, you know, as Hannah said, they do exist and definitely make use of your career service to sort of seek those out and try and get a good idea of what's actually out there. And I definitely agree, it's just about getting your foot in the door, getting a little bit of experience in something. It might not be initially, you know, that pathway that you envision yourself on, but you know, all experience is really going to be good for that development, and many different things can lead to the same thing, if that makes sense. So you could start in you know, something, let's say it's to do with media, maybe it's like a social media role, you know, that could then snowball into being a videography expert who then gets hired by someone else. So, you know, you never know where you're going to end up.
Super helpful information. We're coming to 3 minutes to the hour, and we do need a modicum of comfort break before the next Zoom call. So anyway, I just really want to thank you, all three of you, Andy, Hannah and Jack, for your time today and your wisdoms. And I think we've covered all points in the recruitment process, I think. But maybe we can leave some others for another time. Anyway, just want to thank you and wish you well for the rest of the day and the rest of the week, and to have a great bank holiday.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.